Emma Parsons, CEO of Agrigate. Thank you very much for joining us in the evokeAG studio. From what you've presented at the conference, what's the one thing you'd really like delegates to take away?
Well, it's actually not necessarily something that I've presented, but it's a topic that came up in the panel discussion that I've just been involved in around alternative systems and alternative farming systems. And so that was talking about cricket farming and maggot farming and those types of new emerging technologies. And I think the key point that came through that discussion was the importance of diversity of food systems and the importance of food systems being able to be enduring, and that alternative farming systems and traditional farming systems will actually kind of sit alongside one another in the future, and that really resonated with me.
You are future focused though. You some of the work you've done, you're concerned about how we actually go about feeding the world. You focused on working with data to be more efficient with that and developed a company called Agrigate.
Mm-hmm.
How does that actually work? How does that make producers more efficient?
So Agrrigate's a joint venture between two large New Zealand cooperatives, so Fonterra and Livestock Improvement Corporation, LIC, and because of the nature of their businesses, their cooperatives, they've been around for many, many years in the New Zealand dairy industry. They have a rich depth of data across a whole range of different aspects of farm performance. And the opportunity arose to bring all of that data together and to invite other dairy industry players into that as well, with the purpose of using that data to highlight performance insights to farmers. So you can only do that at scale when you have a sort of a really big data set, because you need to be able to put one farmer's individual performance in context. And that's really important because farmers, we know there's a large spread of performance, there's a significant gap in profitability between those who are at the top end of the performance curve and those that are at the median. And that is all opportunity for profitability, but also those practices that will drive profit in the New Zealand system are also those practices that will drive a lot of reduction in nitrogen loss and potentially reduction in carbon dioxide emissions as well. So by highlighting where farmers sit today and what the opportunity for them is, we hope to enable them and empower them to start to close those gaps.
It raises a couple of questions then. So the first one is, can you paint a bit of a brushstroke then of how that data flows? And the second one I'll get to in a moment.
Okay, so the most interesting thing that we've found in building Agrigate is the intricacies of how farmers actually set up their farms from a data perspective. They use a lot of different apps for different functions, and they have really interesting setups. So, for example, they might have more than one farm, but they might run the same herd across those two farms because it's simpler to do it that way. They might have one bank account that goes across many farms for simplicity of management. And so that's one of the key things that we've had to grapple with in building Agrigate, to allow farmers the flexibility to describe their digital farm as they describe their actual farm business in the real world. So that's been a huge learning that we've had in managing that information and enabling it to flow from one place to another effectively.
You're dealing with data. People, organisations are pretty sensitive about access to data. How are you ameliorating those concerns?
I think that farmers have not been as nervous about sharing data as you would have expected. They have very trusting relationships with their rural advisors, and one of the applications of Agrigate's information, for example, is through banks. So they're looking at how do they understand more about what's going on behind farms and how do they reward farmers for great performance. And I personally thought, oh God, they're never going to share their who would do that, but it just hasn't even come up. It's a real I think part of the nature of the rural relationships that exist in the context that we're operating in. And there is a lot of security around the data, obviously. There's a lot of anonymity around aggregated data, and I think in New Zealand particularly, farmers want to help one another. They compete with themselves. They're not competing necessarily against their neighbours.
It strikes me as a bit of benchmarking, though. That's kind of one of the things that's coming out of it, but you're actually able to filter out, well, maybe this is why someone's doing better. Is that what the outcome of that is? And then suggest, fertiliser solutions or whatever the case may be?
We're not at the stage of suggesting solutions yet, but we are at the stage of being able to provide very granular benchmarking insights. So we can enable farmers to get down to a 10-kilometre radius around their farm to understand, how they sit relative to productivity in that area. And we've also just recently found in our work with farmers that they're actually not necessarily that interested in benchmarking themselves against the full production base. They really like to benchmark themselves against people that they know and other farmers who they trust. And it's much less of a competitive relationship than you would expect. So, that they will say things like, I just want to benchmark against people on my road, or just against my brothers, or I just want to build my own benchmarking group of my discussion group that I go to. And so, that's been a really interesting thing that we've found through the data. Yeah.
Are you starting to see successes? Are you starting to see productivity improvements through use of what you're providing?
It's hard to measure that. It's very difficult to measure, that because I saw this insight, I've done this differently and I've got this outcome. That will become apparent over time. Where we're seeing a lot of benefits to users at the moment is through being able to share data effectively. So saving time and being able to have better conversations because people are talking about the same information. So that might be with rural advisors and banks and accountancy practices, for example, or it might just be within your farm team. So being able to share, being able to all look at the same dashboard. If you're a farm owner, the share milker and the worker on that farm all being able to look at the same information we get a lot of positive feedback about the benefits that provides.
Yeah, I got the impression from that we seem to have a lot of different niche solutions to various areas, but you are bringing them all largely onto the one dashboard.
That's right. So at the moment on the platform we've got all of the milk information, we've got the animal information from LIC, we've got it's milk information from Fonterra, but it is open to other producers who want to come on. We've got nutrient information coming through from Ravensdown, who's a large producer. We've got financial information coming through from Figured, who's also our development partner. We've got weather information. We've got payroll information that's coming on. So it's really starting to bring a lot of those data sets together. And as we're getting better at integrating data and starting to understand a lot of those intricacies and tricks around it, we're well positioned to bring more and more data partners on as we go. So we're looking at soil moisture and irrigation and those types of data sets as well.
You've got some big organisations behind you. Does that make the potential for commercialisation beyond the shores of New Zealand a lot more feasible?
I think it can do. I think that fundamentally the problem that we're solving is an efficiency problem. So it's about saying, how do you understand what good looks like? What are the pieces of information that you need to be gathering in a market to be able to evidence that? And then how can you bring large, diverse data sets together to provide insights? And I think that is a global problem. I think we are advantaged in that we have access to infrastructure in other countries that makes that a possibility for us. But right now, our focus is really on New Zealand and how we can best support farmers there for now.
Do you think it'll have application to Australia? Australia's, you probably look across the ditch and see an endless story of dairies shutting down. And I do wonder whether aggregating data like this would help producers here.
It could do. It depends on the data sets and the quality and availability of data that's there across the industry. I mean, I think what I hope to see, the pressures that Australian producers are under are universal. And I think that if we can do anything, it's to enable those conversations to happen, because you've got that insight, early on in the conversation, to be able to say, well, am I resilient to the change that's coming, and is my farm system operating at the level that it needs to be able to be enduring.
And what are you excited about in terms of walking away from this particular conference and taking back to New Zealand with you?
I think that's a great question. I really enjoyed a lot of the discussion this morning around lifting our sights, I think, in terms of setting our ambition higher. I mean, I even take that challenge on myself. We're focused on dairy at the moment, but, I think that we always need to push ourselves to say, actually our ideas are really great, and we have, I think, Kiwis and Australians have, a really practical and pragmatic approach to solving these problems. And we needn't be reticent about it. We can be ambitious, and we can work together and take on the world. Probably the number that sticks in my mind is the VC person this morning saying, you need to get to $100 million growth, and you sort of think, well, that's not really where we set our sights in New Zealand and Australia, and perhaps we should be.
Well, it certainly sounds that's what you're doing. Emma Parsons, CEO of Agrigate, thank you for your time and joining us in the evokeAG studio.
Thank you very much.